Bill Gross and Jeremy Grantham have blasted the Fed's loose monetary action, saying that they renewed asset purchases are actually in danger of becoming ineffective. Next week, we've got the Fed obviously going to be telling us what kind of quantitative easing was done. What are your expectations?
Well, I think the Fed has to do something. I mean, we have a very low inflation, even deflation, in a setting where that's not helpful. The consumer's over-leveraged and deflation makes it worse. And they have to move aggressively, but it's all about their communication. What do they tell us that they're trying to do? That's more important than just, is it 500 billion, 700 billion?
I think it's interesting that the communication so far has been, look, we're going to be there if things deteriorate even further, maybe, continuing to pound the table on the Fed is not going to allow an environment where, we see deterioration. I mean, that just tells me that things are pretty still fragile.
Things are fragile. I think where they're pounding the table is not that they won't rescue the economy, but they're at least not going to let prices start falling and get this ingrained deflation like Japan had. And that's, I think, where they need to move decisively. The trouble is, they're not all on message. There's clearly disagreement. And are we at a juncture where Ben Bernanke is going to really take control and say, this is what we're going to do? Because I think if he doesn't, it's very hard to have a clear communication of what they're trying to do when they don't agree.
But of course, all of this money and sort of liquidity out there has created a debate. Bill Gross says it's somewhat of a Ponzi scheme. Is that off base?
It's colorful. I mean, and I wonder what we're doing with our debt and stuff in the future. But I don't think this is about that. This isn't about fiscal policy. This isn't about, cutting taxes and raising spending forever. This is about preventing prices from going down and getting caught in this trap where it's making the problem worse. It's making the housing problem worse. It's making the overborrowing worse.
Now, of course, the market has been up strongly in the last 2 months. I think we're looking at about a 10% move in September and half of October. Is all the good news priced in? I mean, next week, let's talk about what scenario could play out. We get a Republican win of the House. Who knows about the Senate? But let's say we get a victory, which, of course, is what everyone's talking about, that for the midterm elections. Then the next day, we get the quantitative easing. Let's say, for simplicity's sakes, it's $500 billion, which is sort of in the middle, right? Is that what you think? Or you said maybe 700. Who's to know?
Yeah.
So if we don't get any more than that, and if that's what we get, does the market sell off? What kind of reaction would you expect from all of these events next week?
I mean, it's hard to say all the good news is priced in when the sentiment's so much it's either going to be weak or awful. So, there has to be some upside within there. So, I think if you look at history, like as Carmen Reinhardt and I have, there are a lot of cases where the stock market comes back in 3 or 4 years.
So what is the best action for the Fed based on all of the history that you've studied so well? Obviously, in your latest book, you talk about the different bubbles and cycles that you've seen. What, in terms of the environment where we are today, would be the best course of action?
If it were me, I would take a chance and be more aggressive about trying to raise inflation expectations and normalize them. If we don't, there's a risk that we're just going to grind on for a very long time as consumers work their debt burdens down, as the housing market clears. I wouldn't go crazy, and there is a risk. It is risky. I said take a risk. But I don't think it's a huge risk. I think it's a calculated risk. I think they're going to take it, but I don't know if it'll be at this meeting.
You were really the first person, and it was in Davos a year ago, to mention the sovereign debt crisis. It felt like as soon as we got back from Davos and the World Economic Forum, everyone was talking about it. But it really was you first to bring it up, as far as I'm concerned anyway. And I know you've been analyzing sovereign budgets, most recently warning that the UK may have a bad decade if the budget deficit is left uncut. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think they did the right thing for the moment to work on the fundamentals. I mean, a lot of Keynesians say, no, they're crazy. They're going to drive the economy into a recession. Maybe. But I think the countries like the UK, the United States, Germany need to work on the fundamentals and not just worry about, short-term stimulus. I'm very worried about budgets in Greece, Portugal, Ireland, and we could go on and on. I think in the UK, it's about getting the fundamentals right, not so much a complete collapse.
But what are the implications of that? I mean, should U.S. investors be worried about that sort of upset? And if we were to see, budget deficits even deteriorate further?
Well, I think if we're talking about Portugal, Greece, Ireland, Spain, yes, there's trauma to come. Eastern Europe, that's not over. I think it's manageable, but there's trauma to come. I think for the United States and other countries, it has to come under control. I worry what's going to happen after the election because the economy is going to be slow, and supposing the Republicans win, I assume they're eventually going to agree on more tax cuts, creating a worse problem down the road.
Well, I mean, the tax cut issue, Congress left before deciding on whether or not to extend them for everybody, to do anything.
Oh, I mean beyond that. I don't just mean letting the Bush tax cuts, not expire by continuing them. I mean beyond that, because the economy will be slow. President Obama will want to stimulate the economy. Congress will want to. They may agree on tax cuts. I wouldn't be surprised.
What kind of a 2011 are you expecting in the U.S.?
I think soft growth, 2 or 3% growth.
Bump along the bottom for a little while.
Yeah, healing slowly. I don't think it'll be worse than 2010.
How's China doing? You said in July China's property market is beginning to collapse, and that will hit the nation's banking system. Where's your view today?
Well, I think there's definitely property bubble in the major cities in China, and they're running a tough balance because they want to slow it down, but they don't want to overshoot by having the whole thing collapse. They've softened up for a while, and the economy started growing fast. Now they're tightening again. I think it's definitely a challenging issue for them to manage.
Does it surprise you that we're having these currency wars all around the world?
Well, the problem is everyone wants to export their way out. We want to export their way out. The Chinese want to keep exporting. Germany wants to keep exporting. And the countries which we're borrowing can't do it anymore. So I think the currency war is a bit of a stalking horse for this broader problem of trade war. Let's hope it stays at currency wars. That's really kind of benign. I'm worried, again, with Congress changing, that could be a wild card in the next Congress.
So that could be actually the issue that we're talking about next year.
Could be.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe 2012.
Let me switch gears and ask you about housing, because housing has been missing in action in this economic recovery. Why has it been so difficult? And what are the repercussions of these foreclosures backed up in the pipeline? We'll have a host of foreclosures continuing to pipe through the system in 2011.
It slows down the recovery. I mean, they want to find a fair way to resolve the whole thing. But on the other hand, this is the deleveraging process, is these defaults, these foreclosures. Many people have borrowed too much, and that's part of the process. Housing prices probably haven't found a bottom in a lot of places, and maybe they're not far off, but it could grind its way for a long time. Again, Carmen Reinhardt studied, and I studied along periods of this, and the equity prices often come back. Housing prices, it's much more rare.